been in this room a lot today, haven't we? Well, I am very, very happy to be able to introduce our, what is this, our third for 2024. At some point I'm going to lose track, so I'll stop saying that at some point. But I'm just thrilled to see all of you come and how interested you are in this series. So we're really, really glad that you're taking an interest. We're so happy for John, who does all the videotaping for us, and this time the card is working. So without further ado, let me please introduce and please welcome with me Dr. David Anderson, who will speak about his career in life.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been asked, where have you come from? And how did you get where you are in the last 96 years in 45 minutes? I do appreciate all of you being here. It's a real compliment to me, and I'll try to do you justice. I was born in September 1928 in Iron Mountain, Michigan. It's a little town in the western end of the Upper Peninsula. The Upper Peninsula is bordered by Lake Superior on its upper margins and Lake Michigan on its lower margins. It's a beautiful piece of the world. It was left after the last ice age with tall hills, deep valleys, and all kinds of forest scattered about the slopes of the hills and down in the valleys. It's a wonderful part of the world, and I felt privileged to grow up in that area. My father was a chief machinist mate in World War I in the United States Navy, and when the war was over, he established his own machine shop in Iron Mountain, Anderson Machine Shop. He was a tool and die maker, a master machinist with heavy equipment, and I was convinced that he could fix anything that broke. The town itself was founded on iron mines, copper not too far away, and so many sawmills to handle the beautiful forests that were there, and there was always something broken somewhere. I remember pounding on the front door in the middle of the night that something had happened in the elevator in the mine or the saw in the sawmill, and you didn't call Chicago and ask to part be placed on an airplane and shipped up for the next morning. You had to fix it. When World War II started, he was too old to get in the Navy, although he wanted to volunteer, but the Seabees would accept him over 50. And he joined the Seabees in 1942 and served until 1944 when we lost my father. My mother was a primary school teacher who felt that every child was deserving of an education, and it was her job to make that education fun and allow them to enjoy the experience of growing up with a teacher that was helpful to them in so many ways in adjusting to their new adjustment in the town that they found themselves in. I had a sister 8 years older than I who graduated from the University of Michigan School of Dental Hygiene. A brother 6 years older than I who graduated from the University of Michigan Medical School here, entered surgery, and became a vascular surgeon with additional training. My sister fell in love with a young family physician and married, so that her work was relatively restricted to 4 or 5 years. My brother in the World War II era was sent to medical school under government support, but now he owed the Navy back time again. He was, after completing his postgraduate training in vascular surgery, called by the Navy to go to Corona Hospital in San Diego. He got there only to find that his orders had been changed, that he now was being shipped to Korea. This is 1950. And it was stationed in what is called a MASH unit, the first stop the helicopters made with injured Marines and Army personnel to try to get the injury stabilized or the bleeding stopped, and then forwarded in 45 minutes by again a helicopter to a hospital that was 30, 45 minutes away. The stress of that experience that he had really changed his life. He had to triage the injuries along with the other surgeons who were with him as to which of these they can help, which were too far gone, that they could not extend the time to get them to a hospital. He died a premature death. He did leave the military, but his life was never changed after that time. My sister predeceased her brother. My father was gone. That left only my mother. And she decided that she needed more than teaching skills, and decided that she needed, during the war, World War II, to be part of the effort. She went to Milwaukee and worked for the Allis-Chalmers company, which made tractors, except in the war they made tanks. And she was building tanks for the service, both Marines and the Army services. That left me alone at home, and I was 15 years old at the time. My experience up to that time had been one of a variety of other jobs, working for a landscaper, helping a carpenter build a home. I helped in building a Veterans Administration hospital in our hometown, all of them just as laborers. But my first real chance came by becoming a soda jerk and a gopher for a drugstore. Drugstore that was in a bank building, which contained a lot of other offices, insurance, doctors, dentists, realtors. But it was a very excellent business that Mr. Buckman had, Abe Buckman, who was a proprietor. He knew our family, and when I went in to ask whether or not there was any work for me that might be possible, he said, "Well, we'll make work for you." And he hired me as a gopher primarily, just a helping hand. The routine was for me before school to go into the drugstore, open it up, turn on the lights, empty waste baskets, go to school, come back at noon. They served a plate lunch in the pharmacy that allowed people who worked downtown to have lunch downtown rather than going back to their homes for lunch or brown bagging it. So my meals were taken care of. The cooks and the waitresses saw to it that from the noon plate, some was set aside for me for the dinner that night. After school, at 4 o'clock, I'd go back to work until about 7 to do the chores. Now, the best part of all that was Mr. Buckman himself. He began to say, "Come on back to the lab, I want to show you what I'm doing with prescribing, filling out prescriptions." He talked to me about ethics of business, and morality, of being honest, of not starting a job if you felt you couldn't finish it, or staying with it until you did finish it. And without my knowing it, he became a surrogate father for me. I did not realize that was happening, but that was I'm sure, his goal. He had no sons in his family. He had a couple daughters, so I think he was pleased to have a son that he could work with. The town itself was founded, Iron Mountain was founded on a bed of rich iron ore that was underground. It had to be tunneled to be evacuated. Copper was found not too far away, and there was a very large forestry business harvesting a variety of beautiful trees. It's been said that some of the white pine trees were so great in circumference that 4 men holding hands could not reach all the way around. The first man and the 4th man couldn't reach hands. The tree in circumference was so great. But beautiful hardwood, birch, maple, oak, black walnut, cherry, so that the combination of mining and forestry was the support of the community. The town itself was settled by immigrants, beginning in the few months after the Civil War was over. The largest portion of miners came from Cornwall in England, Welshmen, but there were good farmers and miners from northern Italy, and there were a lot of Scandinavians, Swedes, Norwegians, Finnish, Danish, that would come. The town was segregated. When the new immigrants came, they went to their own people to continue their language and become Americanized and assimilated into the community. The northern part of the town was Italian, the west side was Welsh, the east side was all Scandinavian, and the south side, where I grew up, was a mixture of most everything else, German, Polish, and so on. There was no animosity or bias in these groups. It's just that they sought, when they first came, to be together with people they could communicate and be comfortable with. But with time, all of that changed. The town is still Italian on the north side, and the best restaurants in town are Italian. The Swedes still provide us loganberries for Christmas. The Norwegians, pickled herring. The Finnish, warm clothing. There's been a lot of intermarriage, so there is not as much separation as previously, but still a great deal of caring that goes on between those various national groups. I must have harassed my parents something awful, because I wanted a pony so badly that they finally gave in and got a horse for me. I was in the 6th grade at the time, and my father said, "Now this is your responsibility. You will take care of the horse," which means you have to, before you go to school in the morning, go to clean the stall, to feed him, to curry him, provide him water. After school is over, you go back and do the same again and ride him, because he needs exercise. It was the first responsibility I really had as a youngster. I was 11 years old, but it was a great experience, and I was grateful for first having a pony and being able to care for it myself, but also the fact that it helped me grow and mature very quickly. The horse came with a cutter, a winter sled, a very ornate cutter, 3 places, leather seat, a warm Canadian blanket to put over your legs in the winter nights. If you have never been on a cutter with a horse with bells ringing on his halters and his feet clomping down on the crunching ice. You've missed one of the best winter symphonies there is. It was delightful, and I was very grateful for the experience. I mentioned to you the importance of the pharmacy in my life and the effect that Mr. Buckman had on me in preparing me for life and helping me mature and keeping me perhaps on the straight and narrow. He knew that I liked sports, and as a freshman, which would not qualify me to play on the varsity team, but I could kick a football, and so they dressed me up, and I was the punter for the team as a freshman. But I could have no physical contact. When he realized in the second year that I was missing football season, he said, "Enough. I want you to go and do your sports, your football, your basketball, your track. Will not decrease your pay. You'll get your full pay, and you just have to learn to work a little faster and get the job done in the time that we allot to you." Well, school came along, and our school system in Iron Mountain was, in retrospect, a rather unusual, effective group of teachers. Most of them, of the women, were spinsters. Many of them had master's degrees. 2 of them were working on PhD degrees, one in English and the other one in mathematics. The men were for the most part bachelors, and both male and female teachers looked at the kids that were coming to school and adopted them really as their own children and treated them so. We had a wonderful time at school. We wanted to go to school. The excitement and the learning, the manner of teaching was such that it was a stimulation. I'll never forget some of the wonderful things that Miss Fleming did in mathematics, making numbers fun. The English teacher insisted upon proper English, proper writing, proper punctuation, and we felt that the education we were getting was sublime, but the proof of that was that when we finally got off to college and were competing with other students from larger schools as to how we would manage in competition with them. And I was very proud to realize that I was keeping step. There was no break in my continued education, nor any fault found in any of the classes that I attended. Oh, over here. I did well in high school, and I was eligible then for scholarships to universities. And with the family history of using the University of Michigan, it was an easy choice for me to come back to Michigan. I had a Regents Alumni Scholarship which covered tuition to Michigan for 4 years as long as the grades were kept up. The cost at that time for tuition for a year was $300. Medical school was twice that, $600 a semester, a year. That cost now is $30,000 to $40,000. I owe the taxpayers of Michigan a very grateful thanks for the education they provided me during those early years compared to what the cost was today, is today. When I graduated and I found a copy of my valedictory in one of the folders I had in my desk, and reading it over, I thought, you know, this really reminds me not too differently from what we're experiencing right now in this country. The war was just over in 1946. The economy was trying to come back from its war efforts. The unions were, the railroad unit had gone on strike, and Truman had brought in the National Guard to make them come back to work again, only to find that the Supreme Court said that's unconstitutional. The unions were bargaining for what they had lost over the years in the service during the war. There were confrontations, and, a lot of demonstrations, and some of them were not dissimilar from what we're watching right now on our television sets. It reminded me that our generation has not done a lot to change what has happened in the relationships between industry and unions and our economy. At the time of graduation, I was invited to attend Wolverine Boys State, which is a week in Lansing, East Lansing, setting up a state government. It was an extension of government and civics that we had in school. Each school would choose one or two of its members to go to Boys State, just boys in this case, and assemble them in Lansing, and our job was to recreate a state government, which means that we had to elect a legislature, both Senate and House, a governor, a lieutenant governor, make appointments, assign judges, and the politics of the governorship was won by election. So there were political speeches that had to be made. And somehow or other I got talked into having made some suggestions previously of making amends to some of the state changes that I thought should be evident. I was nominated for governor and elected governor of Michigan, a boy governor for a day. I remember sitting in Governor Kelly's chair dictating letters to his secretary, to my mother and some friends on Governor Kelly's stationery. A few weeks after that experience, and that convinced me that going through politics was probably not going to be what I wanted to do with my life. 2 or 3 weeks later, the governors from other states, boy governors from other states, were invited to Washington, D.C. for a week of review of federal government. We met in the Capitol. We sat in session in both the House and the Senate. We attended committee meetings. We reviewed the Treasury Department and had a good look at the judiciary and the Supreme Court. It was a tremendous experience, exposure and teaching of what our government has evolved to. We had a docent that showed us all of the memorials, the unique buildings. We spent time at Monticello, Jefferson's Monticello, and Mount Vernon, Washington's place. Had lunch with the plebes at Annapolis. It was a tremendous experience for that week. And I felt very grateful to be included in that interval of time. I entered undergraduate school then in that September of 1946. My brother was just finishing medical school, graduating in December of 46. They had an accelerated program to get physicians through medical school and on into training as quickly as they possibly could to increase the number of physicians that were available, especially in the military. My football coach in high school had played football here at Michigan as on the line, on the defensive line, and his best friend was the tackle next to him, Jack Blott. My football coach in Iron Mountain said, "I'm sending you down to Michigan with a letter. I want you to take it to Jack Blott and tell him, have a look at Anderson. I think he's got possibilities." So I gave that letter when I came down to Blott, and he was a line coach, and he listened very carefully and knew that the recommendation was one of real sincerity. But he said, "I'm the line coach. I'm not going to be able to coach you in anything you do. You're going to have to go out in the field and prove yourself." He said, "I'll show you your locker and get your equipment, but by the time you're on your own." Well, freshmen were not allowed to play varsity football at that time, but there were enough freshmen that they created a freshman team which would then play other freshman teams in the Big Ten. And we had some good athletes, and every once in a while our goal was to duplicate the team that we were playing the following weekend, the plays, so that the varsity had a chance to look at the kind of passes and runs and blocking and so on that were done. Well, every once in a while we were good enough that we scored on the varsity. Coach Chrysler, and you didn't call him Fritz Chrysler, it was Coach or Mr. Chrysler, would shoot out the varsity, but never complimented any of the freshmen. But we appreciated that opportunity. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. I mentioned the quality of the kids that I grew up with, the variety of nationalities, the quality of their efforts, the pressure of family to do well in their new country and to learn English. We were a group that had a lot of fun together. All the seasons were something special for us. In winter, you joined it, you didn't fight it. You got skis and skates and toboggans and snowshoes. In the spring, with greenery as it is now, trout season was open and fishing was a first. The summer was full of good weather, beautiful lakes, lots of picnics and camping, hiking. By fall, there was bird hunting, deer hunting, a beautiful array of colors between the evergreens and the hardwoods in the hills. So we had a remarkable exposure as kids growing up, and I do not remember any disturbance, any residual allegiance, any bias. We all got along wonderfully well and enjoyed each other in that there were habits of each of the ethnic groups that we enjoyed participating in. I mentioned the Italian restaurants and the cooking. I learned to prefer cooking in Iron Mountain by the Italians and appreciated it more than I did when I was in Italy eating the fare right in Italy. But among this group was a fair-haired Swedish girl that attracted my attention when we were in high school. I felt I needed to get acquainted, so we became friends. And as we grew up through high school years, we each realized how much alike we were, how much we enjoyed the same things together. We had the same faith that helped us along. When I went off to college, we were separated for those 7 months or so. Both of us met and dated other individuals, but when we got back together for summer vacation, 2.5, 3 months off, we just seemed to pick up where we had left off previously, and it became obvious that we were falling in love. We waited until we were sure that this was the right thing to do, but were married then in 1950. Joan joined me down in Ann Arbor. At that time, I was between my freshman and sophomore year in medical school, and Joan had been a doctor's assistant and had learned occupational therapy, and she got a job in the Department of Psychiatry with individuals who had returned from Korea with brain or head injury that needed intensive occupational therapy. We lived in a little apartment on Observatory, a block and a half from the front entrance to the University Hospital. Our lifestyle was very simple. While I had scholarships to school, they did not quite meet the need, and I had to find additional work. But that combined with Joan's work in occupational therapy was enough to carry us along through medical school. I learned to do cross-match of bloods for tomorrow's operative procedures. We were very close to the School of Public Health, where they were doing experiments on a new drug for malaria, but they were testing it on monkeys, and the monkeys would not swallow the pill, so you had to put a tube down to give it to them to see whether or not the toxicity was such that it would be worthwhile trying it on human beings. Well, the monkeys, of course, didn't like that tube going down. We wore leather gloves all the way up to our shoulders because they would bite if they had a chance. But these are the kind of side jobs that I worked out in order to supplement our income. We lived simply, but I do not remember being any less happy then than we are now when we have what we've been able to achieve over the intervening years. I decided that it was important for me to get through medicine in a hurry. If I really scrambled hard, I could get all of my required studies in and do well enough in them that in 3 years I could qualify for admission to medical school, and that happened. So I was 20 years old when the average freshman medical student is 22. A lot of competition, but it was healthy, and it helped me stay on a course that directed me to excel also in medical school. Our life in Ann Arbor, being married, was unique in that most medical students were not married, but it turned out in my mind, to be the very best thing that ever happened to me, to marry my wife. Our marriage lasted for 72 years. Unfortunately, Joan at age 86 had a severe stroke with the loss of her right side and the loss of ability to speak. She had intensive speech therapy for 6 months at the university from 9 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon, 5 days a week. And after initial improvement, it became apparent that there was further degradation of her skills, and she needed assisted care, and the only option we had was Glacier Hills with its continuum care that we felt we were going to need. The realization and the happiness that I had with Joan and what I experienced with good people who had helped me along the way. The pharmacist was one, and very important, Presbyterian minister who had 2 sons my age, were neighbors, a block apart, became very much a member of that family when my father died. I came close to going into seminary, but medicine won out.
Too bad.
Other individuals along the way were the teachers in high school who showed particular attention if you had some talent to really help you develop. To the people that I work for, the jobs that I had, that was especially true in working with the building of the Veterans Administration Hospital. Hard labor for the summer, but a very meaningful time for me of maturation and development. The time in medical school did go by quickly. We were so busy and working so hard that there wasn't much time to play, so our lives were simple. We rented an apartment for $67 a month. It had a garage, but we had no car. And it had a dirt floor. So I helped out with the rent by doing windows, shoveling the snow, cutting the grass. And as I mentioned to you, the happiness that we had during those years matched that which we had later on when we didn't have to skimp so. In the summer we were married. Joan's father was a purchasing agent for an engineering company that made winches for the Great Lake ore boats and conveyor belts for loading and unloading, and thrusters, bow and stern thrusters on their ore boat so that the captain could turn on the thrust and force the boat right up against the wharf or against the ore docks in order to be loaded. Well, after being married in June, he said, I think I've got a job for you. There's a foundry next door to the plant, and I think they're looking for help. So I applied and got the job, and my first job was unloading 40 pounds of pig iron from a gondola car that was there at 7 o'clock in the morning, and it had to be emptied by 3 in the afternoon because that iron would be used the next day in the cupola for the next melt. There were 2 of us assigned to do that, and we just barely would get it done after working very feverishly, sliding 40 pounds, what are called pigs of iron, down a ramp, an I-beam, into the yard, where then picked up automatically with a big magnet and taken in to the furnace, to the cupola. One day he didn't show up the director of the yard said, "You still have to empty that ward. We have to have it tomorrow. You have to stay here until it gets done." Well, I showed him that I could do it in a day. He came by at the end of the day and said, "Who helped you?" And I said, "No, sir, I did it myself." And he said, "I don't believe you." And he said some nasty things, and I had reached at that point a pretty low tolerance of him, and I answered him in a manner that would embarrass me now if I were to say the same things. And I thought, okay, Anderson, you've done it now. You're going to be fired. But nobody said anything more to me. I went next morning to get into the gondola car, and someone at the entrance to the foundry was waving me to come in. I said, well, here it comes. I'll be fired. He said, we're going to make a molder out of you. The molder is the individual who forms with a core of what he is trying to design with a certain sand that is bound together, which is then at the end of the molding day filled with molten iron to make the part that is being designed. This was all piecework, and it gave me a chance to do well because they gave me an easy piece to use, and it was a great event at the end of the season when I had to go back to the college to go back with some money in my pocket. At the same time here in Ann Arbor there was a foundry called the Ann Arbor Foundry. I don't know if you know where that was, but it's down in the corner of Broadway and Plymouth Road. It no longer exists. They made large castings there, but in searching for a job to assist us with our income, I approached the owner. There were two owners, one black and one white. And the white owner had a son who was a dentist here in town, and when he knew I was a medical student, he said, we'll make work for you. And so I went in at odd hours to shake out the molds, to prepare sand for the next day's molding, to take a look at the sample molds that were there to make sure that they were intact. The interesting part of it was that the other individuals in that foundry are all black. I was the only white person, in addition to the one white owner. And he mentioned to me, he said, you're going to get a rumble when you go in there. You're going to have to learn to handle it. Well, I can appreciate a college student going into a foundry filled with experienced molders and iron workers, that who is this kid who's in here trying to get on our way? And I thought to myself, Anderson, you got a problem. You've got to handle this properly. So I tried to make friends, and I asked them for help. Before long, they began to recognize that I was all right, and they began to teach me and help me. Years later, walking down Main Street or on State Street, I'd hear someone say, Andy, hold up, I'm going to talk to you. And it would be one of the blacks that I had worked with that had become a close friend. It was a lesson of life that carried with me the rest of the time. Our time is running out, but I did want to get on to my professional life. In medical school, I chose obstetrics and gynecology as my major effort, and the main reason for that was that the chairman of the department in the university here was from Iron Mountain. And I had not met him before, but they had property up on a lake just outside of Iron Mountain called Spread Eagle, where they had family property, and Mrs. Miller and the boys would go up and spend the summer on the lake. Dr. Miller would come up periodically. So I knew Joan and I frequented the same lake often, and we met the two sons, became good friends. So I moved to Ann Arbor. They were also able to help me adjust to the Ann Arbor atmosphere and would have me over for dinner, and then trips that were made where a day might be used with Dr. Miller giving a discussion in a hospital someplace. The two boys and I would go off and see the town while he was lecturing. But he very often spoke very quietly, without any pressure, on what he saw on the horizon for obstetrics and gynecology. And it was just opening up with hormone therapy, with better anesthesia for deliveries, with safer techniques of maternal care. And the result was that I found myself drifting into the field of obstetrics and gynecology. And I spent then 4 years after medical school in that field at the university. At the end of that time, the hospital was enlarging. The new hospital was in the mill, and a new women's hospital had been built. And I was asked if I would be interested in staying in academic medicine rather than going out into practice. That if academic medicine were something that would work for me and that I enjoyed, that would be fine. If not, you could always go out and join a group and practice. Well, 30 years later, I was still at the university. Obstetrics is a special field, unique almost in medicine, because it's a physician who gets to know his patients over a period of 6 or 7 months. And there's a real relationship that develops between the obstetrician and the pregnant woman. And it's very logical that following childbirth and time, the continued diseases that occur in the genital tract would be a logical next step for the obstetrician to take and become a gynecologist. I was amazed at being at the University Hospital, the number of referrals of cancer that were referred to the University Hospital. Individuals with advanced disease, or where they had been not treated properly, or where treatment has failed. And I soon began to realize that while obstetrics is very gratifying, the real individual, female individual that needs help is the one that has a cancer that especially is not responding or has not responded to therapy. And that's where in the 4 years, in the last year, I spent most of my time dealing with oncology. It became apparent from other hospitals where this had taken place that the best results were occurring in units where a physician would see only cancer patients and become experienced with both the diagnosis and management, but also the treatment and what to do if treatment fails. So a group of us got together and established the Society of Gynecologic Oncologists, a separate board-certified specialty that dealt just with women with cancer. And the results of therapy have been demonstrated over and over again to be very positive. Cancer of the cervix was the highest, when I started training, the highest incidence of all gynecologic cancers. That has now been reduced 70% by careful attention and with improvements of therapy. I had to finally give up obstetrics because I was so involved with cancer therapy, be in the operating room with one patient, to have an obstetric patient in labor ready for delivery in another room was very unfair for the patient, and I did not like it. So I finally gave up obstetrics and concentrated just on cancer therapy. There have been dramatic improvements in therapy over the years, especially the last decade. In the past, therapy has been waiting for the cancer to develop, recognize it, manage it, and hope that the therapy that it was early enough in the history of that lesion that the therapy would be effective. Now the effort has changed completely. We're now dealing with a cellular level, the identification of the human genome and the realization of the contents of the cell and what goes awry when it turns into a cancer is the key now to early diagnosis and treatment before it becomes a tumor mass. I'm sure in 25, maybe 50 years, physicians are going to look back at what we're doing right now and say, how primitive. And it's all going to be through a better understanding of the individual cell, its complement parts, and a means of detecting which of them is misfunctioning and then what to do to correct or change it. All the way from changing a gene that's in a chain, a DNA change that is causing the dysfunction of the cell, or an antibody that is on the surface of the cancer cell that can be used as a means of introducing noxious agents to that cell and not allowing it to generate more. It's an exciting time in medicine. I retired at the age of 68 prior to going ahead with radical surgery, feeling that it was time for someone else to take over. I had done my share, but it was difficult to not see on the horizon those changes that are taking place right now that are an indication that we are getting much farther along with the understanding of the generation of cancer and what to do it before it becomes a serious problem. And I'm optimistic about the future. Now, I brought you through 60 years of experience. I retired 30 years ago. And I am enjoying a third phase of my life. First the adolescent years, then the professional years, and now the years of relaxation and enjoyment. I did lose Joan 2 years ago in June from complications of the severe stroke that she had, and she's dearly missed. But I talk to her every night. You've been very attentive. I'll be glad to have we have a little time for questions. I'll be glad to answer any that you might have. Okay.